Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today we're talking to Jason Ring. He is the global head of Insight Sales over at Global Shares. He's highly passionate and ultra-driven sales leader with 12 years of experience working within industry-leading multinational and market-disrupting startups across both cyber security and fintech all over the world. He's currently based out of Cork in Ireland and is married and is blessed with 2 wonderful children. He's on a mission to support the global startup ecosystem, which includes VCs, law firms, startups, investors, founders, and employees, so that they can effectively manage their equity and company ownership. Jason, thanks so much for being on, man.
It is my pleasure, Raul. Pleasure is all mine. Looking forward to
across the world. I love it.
Yeah, the accent gives it away, but I'm definitely not where you're based.
Yeah, my accent for sure.
Yes, let's just hope all your podcast listeners can understand an Irish accent. So
no, I love it. I love it, man. So, man, we're talking scaling, we're talking investments, we're talking startup ecosystem. So I think the first thing really when it comes to understanding or navigating the current ecosystem, I think we can kind of talk about the shifts that we've experienced in the startup ecosystem from 2020 and kind of like the state of the union right now, just from a high level. In your perspective, Jason, where are we at right now?
yeah, it's a really good question, Raul. And I think prior to when I joined Global Shares, I've worked for pretty high growth companies over the years, traditionally in cybersecurity. And obviously in that sector, there's a whole bunch of investment and obviously companies going public and what comes with that with the share price and investor pressure and stuff. And it's been really interesting to see the success stories in 2020 and how companies have really pivoted. So like to give an example, next month I'm helping the companies in Israel, and this is all medtech and agri-tech. So you literally see individual sectors spawning up where they're really honing in on a certain industry that they know is hot right now. And I think that's what we see with investors, and we can touch on that in a minute, but I definitely see a pivot to certain sectors more than others, especially from the ecosystem. I think that's really, but it's exciting as well because what you find, I think there was a story recently about in 2008 when the last recession hit, all of the companies that became unicorns on the back of it that didn't exist prior to recession. I think you'll find that as well this time. I think there's going to be so many people that innovate and so many, really clever founders of companies. But I think the important thing for them is to make sure they set themselves up for success,
That is, that's always the key thing as well. Looking at the trends, being able to adapt and shift. And I know that, in regards to this, looking at, growth-oriented companies or companies that are looking to make a pivot or change. And I know you mentioned that there's essentially 3 things that you're looking at: tools, techniques, and procedures. So when you're looking at companies and they're adapting, they're shifting, they're growing, they're looking to scale or they're scale-ups, these startups, what are some of the TTPs, as you call them, that you suggest that they should look at or invest in as they maneuver, during these times, but also focus on growth?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the, as I call them, the TTPs, the tools, techniques, and procedures, I think that relates to everything in related to the business. So not just their product market fit or, how they talk to their employees or how they attract customers. It's also the first salesperson they hire in, like what is, what are their metrics going to be? How are they going to target that market? What is that target market? Do you even know what the total addressable market is? Does your product fit into that market? Who are the competitors? What is that market share? There's so many different factors than just having a good product. So, I spend a lot of my time talking to founders and they really get like passionate about the product side of it and the vision, and really understand, in their mind where it's going to be and how it's going to fit. But when you get into like, how do you stack up against this competitor, or things like that, it tends to get a bit watered down sometimes. So I think companies that really understand the metrics behind their business, like how they value their business, what the market price share is going to be, how do they stack up against their competitors, I think those companies that understand that do a whole lot better in front of an investor when they're pitching than companies that tend to not know what the market is about.
Absolutely. I think I say it to my clients of being obsessed with your marketplace. And it has to be a healthy obsession, like you just mentioned, like being able to understand market cap, growth, audiences, trends, and where your business hits that product market fit. But most importantly, in advance to that is also your market to message fit.
Yeah, and I think you can't rush that. I think, the product to market fit, I think you only get a chance to do that right once.
Mm-hmm.
I let me rephrase that. You can definitely do it badly many times, but to get
once. Yep.
It has to fit once. And we all know companies out there that have legacy, brand damage issues, and the companies that really struggle to kind of get out of the niche that other companies and customers see them in. So when you look at that go-to-market strategy, even myself in my role here in Global Shares, we sat down prior to launching a new side of our business for about 9 months before a product even existed, and looked at everything, looked at who are our partners in the ecosystem, how is our offering relevant to them, what point, like how am I going to add value to their business, not what they're going to bring for me, but looking at what am I going to do for them, can I articulate that, does my product or my platform or my service actually stack up and deliver that? Because I think if your product and your story match, it's a win-win. When you have a really great product but you don't get your story right, then it doesn't matter, because your product won't get in front of anyone. Yeah. And if you've got a great story but your product isn't great, then you're going to fall down after you get the initial engagement. So I think anyone that's starting out, like, don't rush to hire that first salesperson just to get out there and drive some revenue so that your investor can see that you're revenue generating. Because once you do that, they're always going to judge you on how fast you grow. So it's like, okay, well, you generated X this year, but you only grew by 12%. And that might be because you didn't do enough analysis on your product market fit, or you didn't look at what techniques to use, what procedures to follow for yourself around the best way to get your business scaling. And we see that quite a lot, especially when you speak to investors on how they judge companies and the growth and things like that.
No, and you packed like 3 big points here, and I want to condense real quick some of the initial points. Is first of all, your product has to match the story. Now, the story is like the wheels and the product is like the engines to the car. Like, you need first the engine to actually run appropriately, and then the wheels to actually get you going. So that's a pretty simple analogy. You can't be one without the other, because then you might, like you mentioned, you might be generating revenue, but your growth is lagging because you have a weak engine. Now, looking at the other points that you mentioned earlier when you're looking at the marketplace, and I want to add to this. So you mentioned looking at my partners, my customers. How is my product or service relevant to them, and how is it adding value to them? And so those are the 2 initial questions that I think are excruciatingly important. Like, why do they care, and how is it going to help their life, help them become better, help their business, help their life, right? And that in itself focuses on trends. It's probably one of the most important things to look at too. Like, what is the trend happening in the marketplace right now? And what's the trend going to be happening next month, 3 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now? And no one can see into the future, but you can certainly have quantitative data, or any kind of data really at that point, to understand where is this ship going? Where is this marketplace going? And then going to the last point you mentioned, which I think is equally as important. How do I deliver it? How do I package it in a way that is relevant, that is value add, and it fits the market, and that ties closely to your story? Now, you mentioned earlier about revenue generation versus growth. I want to dive a little deeper into that, because I think that's a pretty subtle, but I think we can go in a little deeper there. So revenue generation versus the growth, and what you've seen in your side when it comes to like looking at your first round of investment, and what do investors actually care about, and how can companies set themselves up for that?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question around, I suppose, revenue generation and growth, and how that maps to what I suppose some investors that we talk to, what they look at. And I share with you one analogy. I spoke to a VC just very recently, and I always had the presumption that VCs only cared about the bottom line of revenue that was generated. And really what we're seeing in COVID, like there's no shortage of liquidity out there. There's no shortage of people that want to invest in companies. But what VCs are now doing is they're being so selective in how they invest and who they invest with. So we've a whole bunch of companies that are only doing, secondary investment on top of their primary investment. So they're really not investing in anything new because there's less risk. But there is VCs out there that will actively invest in a person. And I suppose what I mean by that is they want to hear a story. They want to believe that the person has a vision for the company and that they understand where that vision can go. And how that ties to revenue generation versus growth is, if I'm a pre-seed company, or if I'm going through an accelerator, or I'm bootstrapping or whatever, obviously getting that first bit of revenue on the board is a massive milestone because, hey, I'm revenue generating. Great. But if you generate revenue today and whatever reason you're not really understanding the true growth trajectory of your company, then it's going to damage and hamper your future investment rounds because you've kind of made the leap to show some revenue and be that person. And yeah, I've got the revenue and it's fantastic. And hey, Mr. VC, I know we closed 300 grand of revenue this year. And then they're going to ask you, well, what do you project next year's growth is going to be? And where do you see the investment going to be in 4 years' time? And what's my multiplier? And, all those different factors. So I think people at the moment are really trying to generate revenue. And like, I get it. I understand why they're doing that. But sometimes if you do it as a knee-jerk reaction out of panic and fear, it does actually hamper the future growth trajectory of your company and how investors actually look at your company and the valuation. And it kind of hampers your story as well, So I think it's very important to just take your time. Don't rush to get to that stage where you just want to be like the guy down the road who's got his Series A round and, hey, we're all in the same place and isn't it great? You kind of need to step back and like, what is my story? What am I pitching and who am I? And I think from speaking to VCs, Raul, I think that's what they want to see. They want to know there's a bit of substance to the person and the company,
I mean, I understand the fact that, revenue and bottom line is important, but like you mentioned, it's adding on top of like, okay, what's the future here? And is this the right team? It reminds me to a similar podcast that we had with Purin Shah over at Ink Builders. Like he mentions, and when he works also with like investors, is that not only do they care about revenue and growing revenue, but they also want to know, like, is this the right team? Is this the right person? And the heavy emphasis, it's almost sometimes it can be missed focusing on the person, the team, the leader, the vision, and growing, actually growing something together. So I think that's pretty important. How do you formulate those kind of stories? How do you suggest founders be able to come up with a very strong, compelling story and maybe even vision? Like what are we trying to do here?
Yeah, I think that's not something you can fake. I think for me, like I would like to think I'm a pretty passionate guy about like my own career and like why I join a company. I join a company because I believe in what they do. I know I've never been the founder of a company, but I've joined companies at a very early stage. And what my customers liked about me was I really believed in what I was selling, right? I really believed in the service or the product I was providing. And the company believed in it, and they, that's stacked up for customer service. It's stacked up for product delivery. It's stacked up if there was an issue, or it's stacked up across the culture of the company. That from day one, the founder really was passionate about the product or the solution they're trying to solve. And I think that's what investors are looking for now. They're not just looking for a quick win somewhere, because there's so many quick wins out there, right? If you want to invest in, Uber or whatever it is, you make a bit of money out of it. But what they're looking for is that long term, someone they can really attach themselves to and see grow and blossom throughout the life cycle of a company. And like I was looking at the long term approach, and I was looking the other day, and I didn't get the answer to it, but in my head it was, how many companies that are at Series B or D, Series C, B, or D, where the founder is still the CEO of the company and actually runs the day-to-day. I'd love to know the percentage of that, because what we hear a lot of the time is that the founder of the company that understands that they can bring the company to a point in time themselves before they need to step back, they're so much more successful than someone that just will never relinquish control. And obviously for an investor, you want to be able to work with someone that feels they can collaborate and give some of that pressure to someone else that might be better fit than someone that just wants equity, liquidity, and just won't give anything to anyone.
That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I letting go is easier said than done, but also for founders, it's like it actually makes your company more valuable. The more that you can actually let go, or the more that you can have the company run like a machine while you manage and lead growth, or you lead initiative, or even vision. Now, this gets to like a next interesting question. So around, getting ready for the next round or getting ready for your first investment, there's a few things in line, like obviously getting the company prepared. And I like to dive into that, but also there's the big E word, right? It comes with equity. How much should owners give up? How do you manage that discussion? Like, what are some of your perspectives in the company that you've helped and supported? Like, how do we go about not only just preparing, but how do we understand what's our company worth, how much to give up, how to look at equity, how to slice it up?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think what we've seen, even in my current role, is a total pivot to how companies are currently looking to take on future investment versus what they probably would have done 12 months ago. So, for example, we've seen a big shift in companies taking on more debt, so convertible debt, than actually giving up any equity. Because if I'm in the retail sector or if I'm in the travel sector at the moment, I definitely don't want my company to be valued and then give up a whole lot of equity based on that valuation, because it's not a great time for my company to be valued right now, because the industry I'm in isn't great for valuation. So maybe in 24 months time, me, getting that round of investment based on a really healthy valuation is better. So we see a lot of people turning to taking on debt, either short or long-term debt. And that's been, like, I've seen that since probably February or March. We actually wrote a blog recently about how companies are just kind of pivoting away from giving straight equity. Because the funny thing is, it sounds really simple to say, hey, Raul, your company is worth $1 million based on X and Y values. I want 10% and I'm going to give you 100 grand. And you go, oh, great, thanks. But there's so many factors in that you need to consider. That 100 grand today has an evaluation attached to your company. That 10% today might be worth a significant lot more to, potential loss to you in years to come, because you didn't have the, I don't want to say confidence at the time, but it was fear. Fear drives it. The fear of not succeeding, the fear of not being around next year drives people to panic into getting, settling for a valuation. I think that's what we see a lot of. I have to go with this first investor because who's going to be here next week? Maybe I won't be here next week. So I think a lot of it is driven out of fear and panic. And, if you speak to a lot of, if you ever listen to Steve Jobs or Bill Gates over the years, or any of these really successful guys, there was a time in their career where the fear was so great of failing that they could have just taken the easy option, but they didn't. And that's not an easy thing to do. I'm not a founder of a company, so it's easy for me to say that. But I think just don't have the fear or panic that you have to take the first offer that comes. You really need to understand, where do you value the company, and does that stack up? It goes back to what we spoke about earlier, Raul, about the valuation of the company, the growth trajectory. What stage of growth are you at? Where does your product fit? What is the total addressable market? And if they all add up to an X number and you're only getting offered a percentage on a Y number, I think you need to challenge that. I think you need to sit down. And it goes back to the point you made earlier. The more prepared you are for that round of investment, the more you can negotiate. If you come to the table with half of your answers missing, you're not going to have the ability or credibility to negotiate.
It's pretty strategic there. And it's also, I know founders who have anxiety minds that they're driven, and that drives them or back against the wall to grow. And, that has its place, but it's also, like you mentioned, being prepared for that initial conversation. I think that, if you're really ready to bet, because launching a company is not easy, right? Like this isn't like simple stuff you can do over a weekend. You can launch an offer over a weekend. You can't launch a company like that over the weekend. When you start going on the startup or you're scaling up or you're looking to grow, how much are you willing to bet on yourself? And I think we miss that, right? Like we miss that mindset. Like, the best person you can really bet on right now, if you truly believe in the product, if you truly believe in the market, if you truly believe in the mission, like having that bet on yourself. And again, it is easier said than done. And it's not to say that, if you're taking the out or you're taking the first investment, you're doing something wrong. No, we never know the other outcome because we can't see, a alternate universe outcome right now, right? But specifically, I think it's looking at this, like you mentioned, looking at the data, looking at the marketing, being pretty firm and saying, this is where the company is right now. This is where it can be going. Here are the action items we're doing and that we're taking in order to achieve that step. Here's their progress. So you're measuring KPIs. And I think with that, it builds up confidence. So it's not just betting on a wish, it's betting on here's some firm data. We're not there yet, but we're definitely in the trajectory.
You just hit on a great point that I want to pick up on as well. You talk about data comparisons. So I think where we're going to go with this, when I was in cybersecurity for that amount of time, we always spoke about battle cards and how we stacked up against our competitors, or do you have comparative data about how reliable your product is over this product? And you have your magic quadrants. Everyone knows what a magic quadrant is. This is the visionary section, this is the company that's a market leader. I think where we're going to go with investments, and I think I've already seen it through some of my own discussions, is we're going to now start seeing a lot more use of AI and ML and other mechanisms to actually do a valuation comparison in companies based on where they're at, what round of funding they're at, how much revenue they've created, what industry they're in, and they're going to be able to, I suppose, do a direct comparison with other more established companies in that space to say, hey, this is where we are right now. This is where they're valued at. I believe we can get there. This is how I believe we can get there, which is why the valuation you're giving me doesn't stack up. So I think we're going to get there. I think you're going to see a huge push in valuation tech in the next 12 to 24 months. And that's really going to be driven out of that peer-to-peer comparison. And that will be, I think that's going to be critical in any investment round when you're sitting down with your potential investors, is to have that data at hand, because you know what, they're going to have that data at hand. They've gone and done their homework. They're not rocking up to the meeting not having done their homework on you. So I think that'll be really important.
And I love that, because that does hit into like their existing databases right now. Like if you look at companies like ZoomInfo, or I think there's a ton of companies like them that collect data, emails, and like just understanding companies as a whole. And they also give you revenue projections or the team organizational structure. It's easier to see that kind of valuation check being derived from existing databases that are already gathering so much data on a daily basis. So for those, I mean, we clearly don't have like immediate access to those right now, at least not at this time of this recording, but for founders to be able to stack up, like you mentioned, stack the cards against their competitors in the market, against their market competition, what are some of the data reports or some of the analysis that you recommend to have on hand in order to gain that confidence when you're speaking with investors?
I think that the first thing you need to do is look at the challenge you want to solve. So me and you could both be in fintech. We could both, be under the label of fintech, and we both work in fintech companies, and we're both creating fintech companies. But my mission and my USP could be completely different to your mission and your USP. And although we might be in the same market as a label, our USPs have totally different total addressable markets, total different personas, different business drivers, different competitors, because every USP is different. And it'll resonate with different people. So I think the first thing you need to do is understand what your USP is, understand who you want to compete with, and then go and do a lot of research on those people and understand how do they sell, how do they market themselves. Okay, this is how they market themselves. How would I stack up against that? And you like at the moment, there's no secret sauce that will give you everything on your lap, on a food platter. But what there is out there is the power of just hunting for the information, and the more information you hunt for, it's kind of like that drip effect. You find one article that leads to another article that leads you to another article that leads you to a great website that leads you to some really good content that was stashed away somewhere on a PDF from 2 years ago that nobody's read. I think the all of the information is out there at your fingertips. You just have to want to find it. like we use tools internally ourselves, but things like Zoom Info, you've got G2 out there, you've got, I mentioned your Magic Quadrants. You can look at all them, but I think you have to look at it through the eyes of who you're attracting. You're attracting your investors. They want to see certain things like the growth multipliers, the story. Is there anything in my portfolio already that maps up to your USP? Because you know what, if me and you rock into a meeting, Raul, and we both claim the same problem that we're going to solve, it then might come down to, well, actually, you're not very unique, and neither are you. So who's got the best growth plan or growth hacking trajectory? And that's really what it comes down to. I think it all starts from your USP and understanding the challenge you're going to solve, and that will help you figure out who you want to be compared with.
Absolutely. And I know that that's a definitely elongated answer for our listeners. And I know that there's not just a one cookie cutter size that fits all, but that's the beauty of this, is that every company is unique. Like you mentioned, all the tools that are accessible. I want to throw one into the mix as well for our audience. Like I've used IBIS World, and that's like a plethora of information on any given marketplace, and it's worth looking into. So looking into all these things, once you understand your USP, who you're competing with, understanding how their go-to-market strategy is, their client acquisition strategy, their process, their branding, their processes, and how they actually treat customers, how do you stack up against that? And I think when you have that comparative data, you might find holes in the way that you do things, or you might find that, hey, I'm doing things pretty well. I can be more confident in the path that we're treading here. I think everyone has competitors. They might not be like direct competitors, but even looking at those who are competing with similar audiences, like you mentioned, like our total addressable market. So Jason, I think this is really good for us to be able to, take action on. But for our listeners out there, Jason, what's the best place for people to reach out to you, learn a little bit more about what you're up to, and how to thank you for this episode?
Yeah, people can catch me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so just look for Jason Ring, and you'll see a guy that probably looked a lot younger a few years back. Is probably the best way to put it. Now that I have 2 kids, I find that out. But yeah, you can reach out to me on my email as well. So jring@globalshares.com. But yeah, maybe after this we can post it up online and see. But catch me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. I pretty much live there at the moment, so that's probably it.
I'll link both the email and the LinkedIn on the show notes. But Jason, I appreciate you being on, man.
My pleasure. Thank you, Raul.